Welcome to Adventures in the Spirit with Jared Lasky. Our hope is that you will be encouraged and equipped through this podcast as we have conversations with friends from around the world. You can subscribe to our podcast and go to our website, firebornministries.com, and sign up for our email list to stay up to date on Fireborn Ministries. And may you have your own adventures in the Spirit. And now we hope you enjoy today's podcast.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining into Adventures in the Spirit, Jared Lasky. We are right here in Kona, Hawaii, and there's a lot of people leaving on mission trips yesterday, today. We just had some, I don't know what you call it, victory laps around the Plaza of Nations here.
I don't know what they call it.
As they're jumping into the vans in order to go to the airport, so lots of excitement here. But guys, I'm excited to introduce you to my friend Josh Bischoff. He jumped in as staff at the School of Digital Filmmaking that I was a student at, and he's also a filmmaker. He's got some projects under his wing and other future projects. He's been part of the School of Digital Film off and on for a while, but I'd love for you, Josh, I'll wait for that guy to drive off. Josh, I'd love to hear your story. Introduce yourself to our audience and let us know what, how you got into this world of making movies.
Yeah, it's kind of complicated. It's not always that easy or straightforward, but I think, the first time I thought about making movies was when my dad showed me Star Wars. The first time he calls that the biggest mistake of his life, because, it kind of, set me on this course of, hey, man, I'm really in love with this art form. And back in the day, it was mostly about, hey, I can create these worlds and just escape into them, and fall in love with them, make the impossible possible all of a sudden within a story like that. Because everything we see when we watch movies, most of the time it's everything we connect with the movie is an actor's face. For a long time I thought I want to act, so I went to acting school as a kid. And then I think when I was 14, that's when I realized, hey, in my mind though, I'm in the movie, but I'm the one making the movie. I'm telling the story in the way that I think the story should be told, and that's when that shift happens. I was I think I'm a director, not an actor. And pretty fast from that point on, I stopped being in front of the camera or stopped acting on stage and realized I have much more fun actually directing the film, making the film, writing the film, seeing projects go up, the creativity. When I realized that I'm more the storyteller rather than the one that is performing the story that is being told. So my passion is a lot more in coming up with these complex structures that are involved with telling a story. I actually enjoy quite a bit of the hardships of making a story, creating a story, and the how do you say it's always different. Every time you do a new project, it's never the same thing. There is a craft part to telling stories that is the same. That's the stuff that you learn in the school here, but that's very basic. But in a really grand and major sense, looking at it, it's every time you're telling a new story, it's a different story, it's a different way of approaching a story, and it's for me at least, it's very personal all the time. So it's a lot of introspective, looking into yourself, understanding yourself better.
So how do you develop a story? What is the process for you? Because I know everybody who's creative, I guess, and especially in the realm of movies. You've made a documentary, you've got a feature length, you've got other projects. How does the story develop? How does that process begin with you?
I think it's different for the most part. There's similarities with the documentary. It was very different with fictional pieces. It's these weird moments that catch me off guard throughout the day. It's I'm a very visual person. I think very visually. I'm very inspired by visual things. When I see the light of sunset hit in a certain way, that's things that call emotions up in me. But for fictional pieces, most of the time I see either a scene with characters I don't have name yet for, I don't know those characters yet, but see a scene that brings up a certain kind of feel an emotion and a kind of like passion too. Like I can't let it go. I have to keep thinking about it, and I'm not sure if that's like the subconscious or my subconscious like trying to the way it communicates with me, saying, "Hey, there's something you're struggling with. You should start looking into this. You should try to understand." And that's why for me, filmmaking or storytelling in general, in my kind of sense, most of the time is asking questions rather than presenting answers. Sometimes it's answer presenting, but in the major part, it's like trying to realize that I feel like there is a question I'm seeking an answer for. The difficult part is actually finding the question, making the question specific enough that you have the ability to start looking for the answer. That is the more abstract version of what I do. That is the smallest part, though, of trying to make a story. Like the fastest part, I mean, the part that is the craft is then giving a name to characters and making them be beings that exists in our life, creating a world around them. I mean, you've seen the Half-Life Pilgrim and saw that it's kind of different than probably most movies are, but it's kind of like that. It was this image of like, there was quite a bit of bitterness in me when I started writing that movie and frustration. And I tried to communicate that state of emotion at that point, like through many aspects, like trying to have the story play out in a world where compassion, mercy almost doesn't exist, or which at least feels like it doesn't exist. It's very isolated. You're very alone. There's very few characters within this big grand city that, for the most part, is empty and desolate. Yeah, and with the documentary, it was more like a heart thing, where it's like I don't know. My heart hurts when I see people suffering and growing up in missions. I think that's something that's been given to me as a young kid already, to actually care and try to understand. I think we're very insignificant when it comes to actually solving those crises and issues, but I think we can all try to understand these people better that live in very different realities than we exist in. And with like Hong Kong, it was a very clear thing throughout the summer where I was like, I really love that city. I've been many times to Hong Kong, and seeing it in flames like that, I longed for trying to be there and witness what was going on, witness the atmosphere, witness the people groups and their motivations. Why would they?
Well, can you describe for our audience? Maybe some people aren't aware.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
You embedded in Hong Kong during a time of upheaval. Right?
Yeah.
So can you? When was that? And what was
That was in 2019, right before COVID hit. I was there in October and November. There was this large protest movement that started out of a political uprising where the Hong Kong government wanted to implement a extradition law to extradite political criminals. There was like a crime happened in Taiwan. I think a Hong Kong husband killed his wife in Taiwan, and he couldn't be extradited and tried for the crime that he committed. But the fear of the people was that this law would allow China basically to say, like, hey, you committed a crime, there would be a crime in China, which not really would be a crime in Hong Kong. It's a complicated political situation since it's like a special zone. It is part of China politically, but it has its own governing body that is overseen by the Chinese Communist Party. So this uprising started trying to stop that extradition law from actually being implemented so people could enjoy their freedoms more. And I think there was a lot of fear involved from the Chinese government. Like, people are just scared of them. They're worried about what their future would look like. And I think that was more like a spark that like lit this tinderbox alight that was like full of these frustrations and worries and anxieties about the future, and especially like the identity of Hong Kong people. I don't think they really have found their place yet, since they are first a colony and now they're the special zone, but they're never their own thing, but they see themselves as their own thing, kind of. So What I was working in Switzerland. I'm one of those directors that doesn't really make a lot of money with directing, so like I have to work. So I was working in Switzerland, and while I was working in Switzerland, that stuff was happening. It was like, hey, I feel like I should be going. I should document this and film this, but I need money. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna work for the time that I committed to work here, and if it's still happening, I'm going now. Pretty much buy a plane ticket and fly over there, grab my gear. Yeah, and I flew to Hong Kong in a time where the protest kind of like reached its peak, and protesters started fortifying places rather than protesting in the street. They fortified universities. So the documentary I shot is mainly reflecting a short period, not the entire movement. It's just about a short period of escalation where it happened. It tries to give people a better understanding how it feels when something like that becomes a reality, uprising, turmoil, when there's real anger and frustration, when political parties become more radicalized on both sides, what that means for the normal working person. And something I realized while shooting a documentary is that it's very difficult to untangle chaos while you're in the middle of it, especially something of that scale. It's not like that there's one battle and you're with the battle group and moving with them, and it's always happening to them or because of actions that they took. It was all happening all over the city, so it's like this needs time to actually be untangled. So pretty early on I decided we're going to shoot a documentary without interviews and without narration. We're going to shoot it in a way where people can experience how it felt like walking the streets. So like there's subtitles that would translate when protesters are talking, what the police is yelling, when they're preparing for another attack or for another defensive push. I've tried to stay quite neutral and try to take a very observational perspective with it. To not take at least obvious sides, I think. I think we're all not 100% neutral, and it's difficult.
Those are people going on mission trips right now.
Yeah. So with that, yeah. No, so what I was talking about, but yeah, that's why I decided to try to keep my personal voice out for as much as possible and give the audience an experience at least how I experienced it, like the atmosphere, the way it felt like being there for these 2 months, almost 2 months, and being tear gassed almost every day.
Yeah. So years ago in it was the year 2000, there was these anarchists, like 400 anarchists that came to the Eugene, Oregon area where I was at the time. I grew up in that area. It was actually the year after YWAM. I was in YWAM for a year. And then the year 2000, these anarchists came and they wanted to reenact the previous year's Father's Day riot. So they were doing these underground concerts, they were roving. Anarchists still have a system of communication. They still have a hierarchy, but they don't want to admit that. These anarchists eventually became modern day Antifa. So this is before Antifa. So we were Christians reaching out to them and everything, but the night of the reenactment, the police came, riot gear, you name it. I had water just in case. I was getting ready to just help, people out if they're getting tear gassed or whatever. No tear gas happened.
Oh wow!
But we had pellets, like they shot pellet bags and stuff like that. And for me, as the police were rounding people up, hundreds of them, they could tell that I didn't belong with them. You know what I mean? Like they're like, oh, like you could see who belongs and who didn't. And the anarchists loved us, and the police loved us. They knew that we're feeding these people and we're reaching out to them and telling them the love of Jesus, right? But that's the closest experience at that time for me, of chaos. And then later combat.
It's probably a much more extreme version of that.
Way more extreme.
Yeah.
But what is it like being a filmmaker? Because your movie is on Vimeo, and it pretty much went viral. Am I right? Like,
kind of, yeah.
So
It's still
hundreds of
fine.
thousands of views.
Yeah.
Being a filmmaker, you're capturing moments,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, what for you is, how do you make those decisions? Like, this moment is going to be captured, or this is going to be in the film, you know, like, and even your feature length, Half Light Pilgrim, beautiful shots, beautiful
Thank you.
shots. So, what is that process for you?
Yeah, with the documentary, it's a very different process because you're constantly, like, it's real time. So like it's not like you're preparing for, like, I'm setting up a certain shot. Not really. It's sometimes you have the luxury to do that. You see, like, okay, they're regrouping that way, so you take cinematic decisions where it's like, okay, we want to capture the oncoming force and the defensive force at the same time in one shot, so you move to a position like that. But most of the time with documentary, it's about just getting the moment. It's not necessarily that it's shot
and being
perfectly.
part of the moment.
Being in it, feeling the moment. Yeah, you can't ignore that. I found it interesting while being there. That's something you never really see in the news necessarily. Moments of chaos. How many journalists are actually present? There's a ton. Like, there was these weird moments where, like, the police and the protesters would clash, and then they would, like, separate again. And in a moment of separation, there's, like, all these yellow jacket journalists, like, just jumping in between and taking pictures. But they were never really in the shot. So for me, it was kind of important. They're part of the moment too. So, like, capturing them too. So I wasn't just trying to get shots without them. I was trying to show they're part of that entire thing too. Like, it's not just the clash between two forces. So there were a ton of those people. With the fictional pieces, it's very intentional. It's a long process I go through. I'm very direct with my cinematographer, so my shots are my shots. The movements are the movements that I say that I want the movements to be like this, because I want them to communicate certain things. And as a director of a fictional feature, your main job is actually making sure that the camera is just focusing on camera, and sound is just focusing on sound, the actors are just focusing on their acting. But you're the one that actually has the vision to, with the movement that the camera makes, with the sound design that we're going to implement and post, with the movement that the actors do, with their emotions they're about to portray, only if those things are combined, they actually work. And I think that is the director's job, like we call it blocking, the term you probably heard a ton of times now in film school. It's like the blocking is like the directing the movement of certain things. It's basically management. I manage that the camera guys know what to do, that the sound guys know what to do, that the actors know what to do, so that in the end, when it comes together, it harmonizes and creates a piece together. And not just one that has strength on one side, but like communicates on all these levels. So I communicate with the way that I frame the shot, the way I move the camera, or the way I do not move the camera. Those are all things that can communicate. The sound that will come from the scene will be realistic. Will it be more subversive? Will it be more oppressing? Will it be loud? Will it be quiet? The acting will be over the top. Will it be normal? Will it be highly emotional? And those things need to be balanced and like prevised in your mind, and then kind of directed onto the screen and adjusted on set. It never works out the way 100% most of the time.
But it tells a story.
Yeah.
It conveys a story, and then you just kind of watch it. See the impact of it. So Josh here jumped in, I think, halfway into the school.
A little later, yeah.
So he jumped in. He was staff before at the School of Digital Filmmaking for a year or two.
Yeah.
And he came here to help some of the staff, I guess, shoot movies. And you'll be shooting another movie here real soon.
A short, yeah. This is more like a thing. Like, if I'm here, then there's no good reason to not shoot a movie.
Yeah, and have fun.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from Josh, especially when I was editing my short film, my school project, if you will, a student project, Buddy Check. And, there's staff helping us kind of make these decisions. But Josh, I appreciated him. He's also prior military, Swiss Army, right? And so I appreciated him being blunt and direct with me. Okay, like, Jared, here's what you need to cut. And I was like, Roger that, right? And honestly, it was confirming what I was thinking too, So I learned a lot from him. He was direct, helping me out, and it was also fun just getting to know him. So Josh, what's your next adventure? What's the next steps for you?
Well, I think the next big level is to make this a bit more viable, I guess. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but until now, I saw myself in being like a pioneering stage. It's a craft, but it's also an art form. So, and I for myself make a difference between the film worker and the filmmaker, and not saying that either one is better, but they have very different responsibilities and jobs. For the film worker, it is a job. They love film, they love being part of film, but they choose a certain aspect of film, and they get good at it, and they just work for people making films, and they can have really good living. It's like, for me, it's comparable like shift work, like 9 to 5, but like shift work because film happens at night, day, whenever the scene is being needed. I always saw myself more as a filmmaker, the guy who actually pioneers these projects, and that is a bit more tricky when it comes to financial side, like being paid for it. It takes a long time for yourself to prove yourself worthy and capable for investors to put money into you and believe that your projects are actually worth investing into. So for a long time I was like, okay, I'm gonna work for 4 months a year in Switzerland. Now also work with the military for the next 6 years, 3 weeks every year, to make money, to give myself the freedom to make movies without without needing to be paid for them necessarily. So I could do the projects that I wanted to do without having to constantly rely on them actually paying, but with that proof, hey, I'm able to do this. I can do this. I'm pretty good at this. I'm meant to do this. So now with the documentary was always meant to be for free online. It was on the distribution side, we were thinking, hey, I want to try to get it to people first. Could we do this ourselves? Do we need the middleman? And it's quite tricky actually getting people or convincing them, hey, watch this documentary from a no-name guy and sacrifice 90 minutes, which is, in today's time, that's a lot of time. Like, people don't have that much attention anymore. So you convince them basically, when you're free evening tonight, before you go to work again tomorrow, do not watch Netflix. Download this Vimeo app and watch Burn with us. Like, and it worked. In certain areas, in other areas, we saw it's quite a bit more difficult to do so. Now with the fictional feature, we're actually trying to go the route of festivals, trying to find a distributor, trying to sell it, and my hope is that it's more like a jumping board. I'm not necessarily hoping to make crazy amounts of money with it. I will not say no to making some money off it, but like my vision for it is more that will enable me to do the next one and then the next one, to make the struggle of making the film itself a little less. I don't think it will always be little. I think that's the area of work that we chose is pretty difficult. You have very little security in job security, because like you're your own boss for the most time, and then you have to sell a product, and then once it's sold, and you have to do the next one pretty fast. Yeah. Awesome. So there's a few movies, there's a few documentaries that I'd like to do that I'm trying to line up for the next couple of years. The next big project is actually making another feature film by the latest in 2023, starting to shoot then.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Josh, what is the best way for people to get a hold of you and see kind of your resume, I guess?
Well, they can get a hold of me on Instagram. If they find me. It's J Bischoff. You'll probably find me.
How do you spell Bischoff? Just for the
listeners, it's like the European German way. It's a Bischoff. And the other way that's probably easier for you guys to find is cockroachstudios.org. That's my production company with a friend of mine, under which we produce the documentary and the feature film. And there's a contact section, and those emails will reach me.
Awesome. Yeah, Burn with Us, guys. I loved it. I was pulled into his documentary about Hong Kong. I'm actually going to drop that into the podcast notes, the podcast description, that Vimeo link for Burn With Us, so that you guys can watch that and reach out to Josh, my friend. And thank you so much for being part of Adventures in the Spirit. And don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast.
Thank you so much for listening to our conversation in Adventures in the Spirit. We hope that this podcast encouraged and inspired you to press into Jesus and launches you into your own adventure. You can stay up to date with Fireborn Ministries by going to our website, firebornministries.com, and like us on Facebook. And may you have your own Adventures in the Spirit.